Everyone thinks Sheepstealer is just another wild dragon. But what if he's actually one of the most important dragons George R.R. Martin ever created? Because hidden inside his story is a challenge to the Targaryens' greatest claim to power. A challenge so significant that House of the Dragon may have removed the very character who proved it. And if that's true, then Sheepstealer isn't really a story about dragons. It's a story about power. Welcome to World of Westeros Explored, and today we're investigating the mind-blowing theory about Sheepstealer's true identity that will change the way you understand House of the Dragon forever. Everyone thinks they know what Sheepstealer is. He's the scruffy wild dragon that lives far from the Dragonpit, eats sheep, and eventually accepts a rider. Compared to dragons like Vhagar, Caraxes, or Vermithor, he almost feels like a side character. Interesting perhaps, but hardly central to the story. But what if that's exactly what George R.R. Martin wanted us to think? Because when you look closely, Sheepstealer is unlike almost every other dragon in the world of Westeros. He isn't raised in captivity. He isn't tied to a royal family. He doesn't serve a king. He doesn't care about succession, prophecy, or politics. He simply lives according to his own nature. That raises an interesting question. If Martin wanted to create another weapon for the Targaryens, why make one that refuses to fit into their system? The more you examine Sheepstealer's story, the stranger it becomes. And when you connect it to Martin's own comments about dragons, something surprising starts to emerge. Martin has repeatedly described dragons not as obedient servants, but as wild animals, dangerous predators with distinct personalities and instincts, creatures that can form bonds with humans but are never truly domesticated. If that's true, then maybe we've been looking at Sheepstealer the wrong way all along. Maybe he isn't just another dragon. Maybe he's Martin's way of exposing the biggest illusion in House of the Dragon. An illusion about dragons, an illusion about the Targaryens, and ultimately an illusion about power itself. But to understand that, we first need to answer a much simpler question. Why did Martin make Sheepstealer so different from every other dragon? At first glance, Sheepstealer doesn't seem especially important. When people think of the great dragons of House of the Dragon, they think of Vhagar, the oldest and most powerful dragon alive. They think of Caraxes, Daemon's fearsome mount, or Vermithor, once ridden by King Jaehaerys himself. These dragons decide battles, shape the course of wars, and stand as living symbols of Targaryen supremacy. Sheepstealer does none of those things. He lives alone, far from the Dragonpit. He doesn't answer to the crown. He isn't displayed as a symbol of royal authority. He survives by stealing sheep from nearby farms, earning the name that defines him. Compared to the dragons at the heart of the Dance of the Dragons, he almost feels like an outsider, which is exactly what makes him so interesting. George R.R. Martin rarely includes something this different without a reason. Throughout his writing, the exceptions are often the key to understanding the rule. When one character, one place, or one creature refuses to fit the established pattern, it's usually because Martin is asking us to question the pattern itself. And Sheepstealer breaks almost every rule. Most Targaryen dragons hatch into the royal family. They are raised by dragon keepers, bonded to princes and princesses, and gradually become woven into the machinery of the dynasty. Over time, they come to reinforce a simple idea. Dragons belong to House Targaryen. Sheepstealer belongs to no one. Long before anyone ever attempts to ride him, he has already established something no Dragonpit dragon truly has: independence. He hunts for himself. He survives on his own terms. He lives according to his own instincts, not according to the needs of kings. That difference is easy to overlook, but it forces us to ask a much deeper question. Sheepstealer has never lived under the system the Targaryens created. He has never been shaped by dragon keepers or raised alongside royal children. He exists completely outside the institution that supposedly proves the Targaryens are uniquely chosen to rule, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the Targaryens' greatest advantage was never their blood? What if it was their knowledge? What if they understood dragons in a way no one else did, then allowed the rest of the world to believe that only those of royal blood could ever hope to ride one? Because if that's true, then the greatest source of Targaryen power wasn't simply the dragons themselves. It was the story they told about who was allowed to claim them. And that story is about to be tested. If Sheepstealer was never part of the Targaryen system, then one question becomes impossible to ignore. How did anyone manage to ride him? According to everything the Targaryens claimed about themselves, this shouldn't have been possible. Their dynasty was built on the belief that dragon riding was their birthright. Their blood was different. Their lineage was sacred. Dragons belonged to them because they were Targaryens. Then Martin introduces Nettles, a lowborn girl with no known noble ancestry, no dragon egg placed in her cradle, no royal upbringing, no secret ceremony. Which brings us to the most intriguing and important question in House of the Dragon that you may have glossed over or never even considered. Who exactly is Nettles, and why did the show erase her? When we look at George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood and the world of Ice and Fire, the Dance of the Dragons is painted as a family feud fought exclusively with royal blood and ancient magic. But buried in the history is a character who shatters that entire illusion, Nettles. In the television adaptation, her character has been purposely omitted, and her storyline was handed over to Rhaena Targaryen. But when you look closely at the text, that creative choice isn't just a simple casting consolidation. It is a fundamental rewriting of the lore. Today, we are going to break down 5 undeniable truths. 1. Why Rhaena and Nettles are entirely different characters. 2. Why the Maesters called Nettles a dragon seed, despite her having 0 Valyrian blood. 3. How she completely disproved the Targaryen dogma. 4. What her existence meant for the balance of power. And 5. Why merging her with Rhaena ultimately breaks the story. Point 1. Rhaena is not Nettles. Let's start with the most basic, unassailable fact. Rhaena Targaryen is not Nettles. The historical texts keep them in entirely separate spheres with 0 overlap in parentage, class, or location. According to The Rise of the Dragon, Rhaena Targaryen is highborn, the daughter of Prince Daemon and Lady Rhaena Valyrian, and twin to Baela. According to the source material, she spent almost the entirety of the war in the Vale under the protection of Lady Jane Arryn, eventually hatching her pale pink dragon, Morning, from an egg. On the flip side, Nettles is explicitly recorded as a small brown girl of 16 and the bastard daughter of a dockside whore. The texts categorize her as plain, baseborn, disreputable, operating actively in the field of battle at Maidenpool alongside Prince Daemon, while Rhaena Targaryen was safely tucked away in the Vale under the protection of Lady Jane. They have different names, they have different parents, they have different bloodlines, they have different statuses, they have different locations, and they have different dragons that they acquired in totally different ways. Yet they lived at exactly the same time. Therefore, the only logical conclusion is that they are entirely distinct individuals. Point 2. The fallacy of the dragon seed label. Nettles is clearly called baseborn, meaning she has no royal blood. If Nettles has no Valyrian blood, why does one instance of the official text refer to her as a dragon seed? The answer lies in the institutional bias of the in-universe Maesters. Because Nettles emerged from the port docks of Driftmark and successfully claimed a dragon, the historical record automatically dumped her into the administrative category of a dragon seed. The ruling class and the Maesters are trapped inside the widely held belief that blood is destiny. In their minds, it is completely inconceivable that a person with 0 Targaryen ancestry could ever master a dragon. When they saw a lowborn girl flying Sheepstealer, they didn't question their worldview. They naturally assumed she must have Valyrian blood. Not once did it ever cross their minds that a person not of Targaryen descent could tame and claim a dragon. So they went with the official narrative and recorded it so, in the texts. But what they assumed and what they recorded was far from the actual truth. Point 3. Breaking the dogma. Because Nettles lacked the genetic link assumed of a dragon seed, she could not command her dragon through innate blood magic or a royal cradle egg. Instead, she shattered the genetic myth entirely through her method of taming.
She does something remarkably simple. She watches, she learns, and every day she brings Sheepstealer a freshly killed sheep. She doesn't try to dominate him. She doesn't force a bond. She doesn't expect the dragon to submit simply because she wants him to. She understands one crucial truth. Sheepstealer is a wild animal, and wild animals don't respond to entitlement. They respond to trust, familiarity, and survival. Day after day, she earns his confidence until eventually the dragon allows her to approach, then to touch him, and finally, to ride him. If this sounds unusual, Martin has actually shown us something very similar before. In Game of Thrones, Tyrion descends beneath the Great Pyramid of Meereen to confront Rhaegal and Viserion. The dragons have been chained in darkness for months. They are frightened, angry, and powerful enough to kill him in an instant. Yet they don't. Tyrion doesn't command them. He doesn't possess some hidden magical ability. He approaches them calmly, speaks softly, and most importantly, frees them. Like many wild predators, they seem to recognize the difference between someone trying to control them and someone trying to help them. We see the same principle in the real world. A wolf caught in a trap may allow a ranger to cut it free. A lion tangled in a snare often remains still while rescuers remove the wire from around its neck. These animals haven't become tame. They're simply intelligent enough to recognize an opportunity to survive. Sheepstealer follows that same logic. Nettles succeeds because she understands the dragon's nature. She gives him what he wants and pays the price required to earn his trust. And that changes everything. Because if Martin is suggesting that dragons can be approached through knowledge, patience, and understanding, then the Targaryens' greatest advantage may never have been exclusive blood. It may have been exclusive knowledge. Over generations, that knowledge became wrapped in a far more useful story that only those born into House Targaryen could ever hope to ride a dragon.
All Nettles wanted to do was tame and claim a dragon. But what she accomplished was a feat that was more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. She proved that a dragon does not care about a bloodline or a family name. A dragon responds to patience, strategy, and respect, like any animal. Point 4. What Nettles means for the Targaryens. Nettles' actions created a profound threat to the Targaryens because it exposed the fundamental lie that only those of noble blood had the divine right and magical power to control dragons. If a plain, base-born, disreputable girl could master a weapon of mass destruction using a bucket of slaughtered mutton, then the idea of the divine right of the blood of the dragon collapses. Power is no longer a genetic monopoly owned exclusively by silver-haired nobility. It proves that anyone with enough nerve and intelligence can seize control of the world's greatest power. This simple action was more terrifying and destructive to the Targaryen powerhold than any king or army. Point 5. Why conflating them breaks the story. So, what happens when the television series merges Nettles into Rhaena Targaryen? It causes a total structural collapse of the narrative. In the books, Daemon and Nettles operate as lovers at Maidenpool, sharing adjoining bedrooms, baths, and gifts. This is recorded in the texts. It drives Queen Rhaenyra into such a paranoid rage that she demanded that Nettles be killed, and Nettles had to flee for her life on Sheepstealer. Implying Rhaena was Nettles would mean Daemon was sleeping with his own biological daughter. Even for a dynasty built on incest, that crosses an unpalatable taboo that breaks the universe's logic. The conflation also causes the narrative butterfly effect. Because the show cannot cross that line, they are forced to delete the Maidenpool affair entirely. In doing so, they erase the exact emotional catalyst that destroys Daemon and Rhaenyra's marriage, trading a daring, subversive narrative for a bloodline-centric shortcut that bankrupts the emotional stakes of the Dance of the Dragons.
Which raises an even bigger question. If Nettles exposed the myth, why did House of the Dragon replace her with Rhaena? If Nettles really is challenging one of the central myths of House Targaryen, then her removal from the television series becomes much more interesting. On the surface, it's easy to dismiss the change as a practical decision. Adaptations combine characters all the time. They streamline storylines, reduce cast sizes, and simplify complicated plots. But this isn't just any character. Nettles performs a very specific function in Fire and Blood. She's the one person who forces both the characters and the reader to question everything they've assumed about dragonriding. Because once Nettles claims Sheepstealer, an uncomfortable question hangs over the entire story. Was she really different from everyone else? Or had everyone else simply believed a story that was never entirely true? Martin never gives us a definitive answer. He never confirms that Nettles has hidden Valyrian ancestry. He never tells us she secretly carries the blood of old Valyria. Just as importantly, he never rules it out either. That ambiguity is deliberate. If Martin had wanted to preserve the myth completely, he could have revealed her to be another secret Targaryen. Instead, he leaves the question unresolved, forcing us to wrestle with the possibility that knowledge, patience, and courage may matter more than blood alone. That uncertainty makes Nettles incredibly dangerous, not because she rides a dragon, because of what her success says to everyone else. If a lowborn girl can earn the trust of the wildest dragon in Westeros, then the Targaryens lose something far more valuable than military superiority. They lose the belief that they alone are destined to wield it. History is full of ruling classes that justified their authority by claiming they were fundamentally different from everyone else. Different blood, different birth, different destiny. Whether those claims were true often mattered less than whether people believed them. Power is easier to preserve when people think only a select few are capable of holding it. Viewed through that lens, replacing Nettles with Rhaena changes more than the plot. Rhaena is unquestionably a Targaryen. When she claims Sheepstealer, the old narrative remains intact. The dragon still ends up with someone of royal blood. The audience is never forced to question whether the dynasty's greatest claim about itself might have been exaggerated, misunderstood, or even false. The mystery disappears, the challenge disappears, and with it, much of Sheepstealer's symbolic power. But even if the show softens Martin's idea, it can't erase the dragon himself. Because Sheepstealer still leaves us with one final mystery. Why did Martin choose to make this dragon a sheep thief? At first, the answer seems obvious. He's a dragon. Dragons eat. Sheep are easy prey. Case closed. But George R.R. Martin is usually more intentional than that. Names matter in his stories. They tell us something about a character long before anyone explains it. Think of Kingslayer, Bloodraven, or the Hound. Their names become shorthand for a deeper truth about who they are. So why call this dragon Sheepstealer? He isn't called Wildfire, he isn't called Mountain Breaker or Stormwing. He's named after the one thing he constantly takes, sheep. Now it's important not to push the symbolism further than the text allows. Martin never tells us that Sheepstealer literally represents political power. This is an interpretation, but it's one that fits remarkably well with the evidence we've already uncovered. Throughout this investigation, one pattern has emerged again and again. Power always has a cost. The Dragonpit requires constant resources to maintain. Dragons consume enormous amounts of food. Wars consume soldiers, wealth, and entire generations. Dynasties consume loyalty, lives, and sacrifice simply to survive. Nothing about power is free. And Sheepstealer embodies that reality better than any other dragon. He doesn't pretend to be noble. He doesn't ask permission. He doesn't care who owns the flock. When he's hungry, he takes another sheep. That isn't cruelty. It's simply his nature. The people living nearby learn an uncomfortable truth. If they want to live beside a dragon, something must continually be given up. Someone always bears the cost. That idea extends far beyond Westeros. Every kingdom, every empire, and every ruling class has required ordinary people to sustain it. Through taxes, labor, military service, or simple obedience, the burden almost always falls on those with the least power to resist. The sheep feed the dragon, not because the dragon is evil, because that's what dragons do. And perhaps that's Martin's point. Power isn't dangerous only when it's abused. Power is costly by its very nature. Someone always pays to sustain it. Which brings us to the final question. If power can never be owned, if no bloodline has an exclusive right to wield it, and if it always demands a price from someone else, then what was Martin really trying to tell us through Sheepstealer?
Sheepstealer isn't important because he's the biggest dragon, or the fiercest dragon, or the dragon that wins the most battles. He's important because he quietly undermines almost everything the Targaryens believe about themselves. The Targaryens built their dynasty around one extraordinary advantage: dragons. But like every ruling dynasty in history, they also built a story around that advantage. A story that explained why they, and only they, had the right to wield such immense power. Whether that story began as genuine belief or careful propaganda almost doesn't matter. It became accepted as truth. But Martin has a habit of exposing comfortable truths by introducing a single exception. Nettles is that exception. Sheepstealer is that exception. Together, they force us to question whether the foundation of Targaryen supremacy was ever as absolute as it appeared. And that's why I think Sheepstealer represents something much bigger than a wild dragon. He represents the true nature of power. Power is never really owned. For a time, the Targaryens believed they possessed dragons. The dragons helped them conquer kingdoms and hold the Iron Throne for generations. But eventually, the dragons died. The dynasty fractured. The throne passed from one ruler to another. The Targaryens were temporary. Power wasn't. Power outlived every king and every queen who claimed to possess it. Sheepstealer reminds us of that. He exists before rulers discover him, and he continues according to his own nature, regardless of the political struggles surrounding him. He cannot be inherited like a crown. He cannot be guaranteed by blood. He cannot be locked away forever behind the walls of the Dragonpit. At best, he can be understood. At best, he can be respected. And perhaps if you're willing to pay the price, you can earn his trust for a while. That brings us back to the sheep. Power always consumes. Kingdoms are built through sacrifice. Wars demand lives. Armies require food, money, and people willing or forced to fight. Every generation inherits the consequences of the one before it. The dragon always needs another sheep. The names change, the rulers change, the banners change, but the principle never does. That's why I don't think Martin wrote Sheepstealer simply to give Nettles a dragon. I think he wrote Sheepstealer to strip away the illusion that power belongs to those born into the right family. No one has a divine right to power. No bloodline owns it. Those who possess it today will eventually lose it. Those who claim they alone deserve it are often the ones most invested in preserving the myth. Because if ordinary people ever discover that power isn't exclusive, that it isn't mystical, that it isn't reserved for a chosen few, then the stories that have protected elites for generations begin to fall apart. Maybe that's why Nettles matters so much. Maybe that's why changing her to Rhaena changes more than a character. And maybe that's why one of the least celebrated dragons in Martin's world turns out to have one of the most important things to say. Not about dragons, but about us. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.